Hello, my name is James Knox. I'm Curator Emeritus of the Fleming Collection, which in conjunction with Dovecot Studios in Edinburgh has put on this exhibition, The Scottish Colourists' Radical Perspectives. And today I've rounded up a veritable posse of professors of international renown in art history who have come to tell me about their favourite works in this exciting show. It gives me very great pleasure to introduce the Honorary Professor Elizabeth Cowling to talk about her choice of painting in this exhibition. Elizabeth Cowling is a world-renowned expert on Picasso, Surrealism, and many other early 20th century and late 19th century radical and revolutionary movements in art. So, Elizabeth, why have you been drawn? What is this picture? Who is it by and why have you been drawn to it?
Well, this painting is called Femme Violon, Woman with a Violin, painted in 1911. It's actually signed by Roderic O'Conor, Irish painter, who spent most of his life in France, his working life in France, beginning off in Pont-Aven in Brittany, where eventually he got to know Gauguin. And I, to be frank, had no idea when I saw this painting from a distance that it was by Roderic O'Conor. It was a complete surprise. And what attracted me was a sort of area of kind of mystery about the painting. I didn't know who it was by, although it reminded me particularly of Bonnard. So I decided to talk about it because I was surprised by it, and it was a discovery. I mean, behind me is what I think is probably the greatest picture in the exhibition by Dada, but I decided not to talk about something I knew about.
When you say it was influenced by Bonnard, explain a bit who Bonnard was and why he was so important.
Well, Bonnard was a painter who came to prominence in the 1880s, who was influenced by the Impressionists. But at this period, in the early 20th century, when this was painted, he was becoming particularly well known for his intimate scenes, set in interiors, very often in bathrooms, where he painted his wife, Marthe, lying in the bath, very often using mirrors. Not this kind of colour range, different colour range, but this very sort of soft, post-impressionist handling. And we know that Roderic O'Conor, who incidentally was very well heeled, he came from a landed family in Ireland, and he inherited, so he had plenty of money. He could afford not to sell his work, and he could also afford to buy other work, and we know that he bought works by Bonnard. But it struck me as being similar to Bonnard in the sense that you have a female model, you've got a mirror, you've got an intimate setting, very close up to the figure.
And you say he didn't have to sell work. I believe this was in his studio when he died.
Yes. Apparently, because of the fact that he had plenty of money, he hadn't any need to sell to dealers or directly to the public. And in fact, the vast quantity of his work remained in his studio until his death in 1940, and nothing really happened to it, as far as I understand, until after his wife's death. And then there was a studio sale in Paris at the Hotel Drouot, the auction house, in 1956, and this picture was one of many paintings that poured out after that sale.
And you say you didn't know it was O'Conor, and is that because it's not? How would you normally describe O'Conor's subject matter?
Well, I think the paintings by O'Conor that I know, and there is a small landscape in the exhibition, are landscapes mainly, set in the south of France or in Brittany, and very vibrant in colour, prismatic in colour, and probably most recalling the work of Van Gogh, who was somebody he admired enormously. I mean, he became friendly later on with Gauguin, but I think really the primary influence on the landscape paintings is probably mainly Van Gogh. He was also interested in Cézanne. So I associated him with that kind of palette, prismatic colour, yellow, blue in contrast, red and green, you know, more the kind of colours that you see in the Dada here. Not this rather muted palette of purples, violets and crimsons. The only reminder to me of his earlier palette is the yellow chair, which is an oddity in the painting.
But he is really the only, because what this exhibition attempts to do is bring together all the artists of that period before World War I who were essentially colourists. And O'Conor is really the only Irish artist we know who fits that bill.
Yes, absolutely. And this is different from that kind of colorism with which he's associated. And the paintings that I know by him are more like the landscapes that you have elsewhere in the exhibition. So this was a surprise, and as I say, I didn't realise it was by him until I read the label.
He did also have a great influence on a key person in this story called Clive Bell,
yes.
the art critic,
yes.
who went to see O'Conor in his studio in Paris, didn't he?
That's absolutely true. So that there is that connection with the story being told in this exhibition.
Yes. Marvellous, thank you so much. Can I ask you one more question? You have such a distinguished career as a curator yourself. Can you name one of the exhibitions that you felt was most exhilarating to curate?
Well, I've enjoyed them all. I found them all exhilarating because I think putting on exhibitions is extremely creative. It's the nearest an art historian gets, frankly, to being creative, apart from inventing things. But I think, I suppose, in the end, the Matisse Picasso exhibition that I did for the Tate and then travelled to New York and Paris, because there I was dealing with two sort of giants in a kind of relationship of intense friendship and observation of each other's work, but also kind of rivalry. And we ended up with so many magnificent pictures. Incidentally, I mean, I can't resist pointing out that this painting in 1911 is contemporary with many Cubist paintings in a palette of greys and browns, fragmented, geometric, painted by Braque and Picasso, of women in studios playing musical instruments. Could this be a kind of Roderic O'Conor, who was not a stupid man and must have known about Cubism, but never showed any influence in his work? Was it a kind of opposition to Cubism? Anyway, that's just a thought.
That's a marvellous note to end on. Thank you so much.